Hello everyone and welcome to All Things Watched. In this video we are going to talk about episode 4 of the brand new Walking Dead spin-off series known as The Ones Who Lived, and episode 4 is titled What We. And what's really interesting about this episode was that it was actually written by Danai Gurira, which is the actor who actually portrays Michonne. So the lady that portrays Michonne in the TV show, in this TV show, was actually the writer, or at least the main writer of this episode. And honestly, I think it was probably one of the best episodes that we've ever seen from all of the Walking Dead series. And it would be absolutely amazing to see Denai continue to write episodes for The Walking Dead, because I think she absolutely nailed it with this one. Now I understand that there be an entire full-blown writing team. She was not the only person to be writing this series, obviously, or this episode, but she would have been the main writer, which means she probably had the most creative control in stuff like the dialogue and, sort of the setting to some degree. But I would think mainly the dialogue and just sort of the atmosphere of the episode. And like I said, and not only did she do a great job at writing this episode, but she even does a phenomenal job with her performance, along with Andrew Lincoln, who of course plays Rick Grimes. His performance in this episode was absolutely spot on as well. And we'll talk about we'll go deep into my thoughts and opinions about the episode after the scene by scene breakdown. So we'll go ahead and do the scene by scene first, and then I'll talk about some things that I really liked about this episode. It's like some of the symbolism, the metaphors, and then also their performances, and just how real this episode was in terms of relatability. Because of the way that Rick and Michonne's relationship was in this episode is extremely relatable to a lot of relationships that we have in real life. So this episode actually picks up right where the previous one left off, with Michonne and Rick in the helicopter, and we see Michonne grabbing Rick and jumping out of the helicopter, and they end up landing in water, which seems like the helicopter is not very high. So I would assume Michonne must have been able to see the water before jumping out. She must have known that the helicopter was not very high. And we also learn later on in the episode that the helicopter actually ended up hitting, running into a building and whatnot. So to some degree, Michonne has actually saved them, which, hence the title of the show, The Ones Who Live, which was actually something that Rick himself always said about the survivors that we have come to love and grow with over the course of the past 10 years. And so once they come out of the water, they end up coming into this apartment complex, or this apartment building, which also sort of seems like a research facility. I did see a couple pretty cool theories online that suggest that maybe this was the research facility that was in the world beyond, which is kind of cool. I don't think it is necessarily, because I just don't think there was enough evidence to prove that, or to, there wasn't enough evidence provided to be able to fully come to that conclusion. But I do think that it's a cool theory, just in the sense of making it, seem to connect to the other series as well, like World Beyond. I was actually a big fan of World Beyond personally. I thought that series was done really well too. But I do think the second season was much better than the first season. Jadis was also in that one as well, and that was all about the CRM. I was hoping to see some characters from World Beyond in this one, like Silas, but unfortunately we never. But anyways, they end up in this apartment complex, and the first thing they do is sort of look around. You see Rick, he's, looking around, he turns on this faucet, and you can tell that this is a facility that holds, researchers, scientists. These people are very smart. It's a very advanced complex. It's basically like a smart home. There's one of those robotic vacuums that goes around. As you can see here, Rick, as he continues to look around, you see the computer. There's a computer here. So these people, or whoever these people were or used to be that lived in this complex, they had electricity. They had, computers. They had, this is a research facility, or at least it very much feels like it. And this is a smart home. You can oftentimes hear the voice talking about the temperature and and whatnot. So this is kind of like a smart home during the post-apocalyptic world, and I really liked it, and I thought it was a really good setting and a really great way to allow Rick and Michonne to breathe but while also sort of making it feel a little more modern and making them feel like they were just living in the modern day in this apartment. Because basically, this episode, which Michonne actually says, is basically like a time out. Uh, and so we end up seeing Michonne changing her clothes. She puts on some clothing that she found here in this apartment complex, and it was a really cool scene here because we've seen Rick, and he's obviously looking at her. He's obviously still very attracted to her. She's basically his wife, and she notices that she has a scar on her back, which is probably new for Rick because he hasn't seen her in 10 years. And we learn later on that this is a new scar that he's not familiar with because eventually Michonne will tell him the story as to how she received the scar. She tells him that Rick had the scar as well, which we'll get into a little later. But still, it was really cool. You could see how he's still very much in love with her. He does watch her get dressed, but at the same time, he also notices that she's been through some stuff because of those scars. And so once she finally changes, then she comes out and finally actually confronts Rick. And I would say that in this episode, Michonne is basically the audience. She sort of says everything that's on our mind, which is why I think that Danai Gurira did such a great job at writing this episode, because it's almost like she knew what the audience would be thinking. The whole series so far, we're like, Rick, come on, what's wrong with you? What happened to you? You used to be so brave and you used to stand up to, this type of evil. What happened to you? And so Michonne sort of, is in the show. Michonne is sort of that character. She's like, what happened to you? Why are you like this? You're not the same Rick that I fell in love with. And she's constantly pushing him and forcing him to try to sort of open up to her. And I really love that back and forth. They actually scream and shout at each other. Both of them, to some degree, have very valid points. But I do think that Michonne probably is more related, is related more to the audience more so than Rick, because like I said, she basically is acting or thinking or saying the things that us as the audience are thinking. And so I really thought that was really clever. I also thought the setting was very clever, which we'll get into later on as well, because the setting itself was very symbolic to their relationship as well. But even right here, when she's pressing him, he's still, pass me the PRV. He wants to call for help. He wants to call for the CRM and whatnot. But, at first she doesn't give in to him, but she will eventually. And so Michonne ends up going over and finding this book, and which is actually a little bit of backstory about Michonne that we didn't know. Turns out that she was a big fan of this novel growing up, and I really liked how she sort of use this novel as a transition into a much harder, difficult, more serious conversation, because she says, I used to think of myself as being a writer, which is ironic because she wrote this episode, but then she ends up turning to Rick and she says, but you've got the creative imagination too, or something along that lines. Like, she's like, you're pretty creative with writing too, after that last letter that you sent me, which causes him to absolutely explode. And then you can see the tension, even just in this screenshot, you can see the tension between Rick and Michonne, and he's constantly, sort of trying to cling to this life that he now has in the CRM, but he's not, while at the same time facing the reality that's literally in front of him, literally in his reality, which is something that he thought he lost a very long time ago, which is, of course, Michonne. So he's sort of torn between the thing that he loves, but also torn between the new thing that he now knows. And even here you can see on Rick's face, the amount of desperation is like he doesn't want to let her go, he doesn't want to call it in, but you can see that he's very desperate and that he really doesn't, it's almost like he doesn't even really know what to say or how to act or what it is that he's supposed to do. And so, after this sort of confrontation, after Michonne says a lot of things that us, the audience, are thinking, what did they do to you? Why are you like this? You're not the same Rick that I fell in love with, so to speak. Then she finally caves and actually gives him the PRV, which to me was actually quite a significant thing, because this shows that even though she probably don't fully trust him, in the sense of she doesn't really know who he is anymore, but she is going to trust him. So I think she's hesitant, but she's going to trust him anyway, because she's going to trust that he will do the right thing. And so they continue with their little back and forth, and while they're talking, the the weather in the background, so to speak, starts to clear up. And as they look out the window, they didn't see the CRM helicopter that they were in. As I was saying before, they were flying very low, and now you can see that that helicopter has actually crashed into the building. And so they keep sort of bickering back and forth, and then finally Michonne just has enough. Like I said, she's just basically saying everything that the audience is thinking. She's literally asking the exact same questions that I've been asking myself. I've been very frustrated with Rick in this series so far. Now, I've been loving the series. I don't mean I'm frustrated with him in the sense that I don't like it. I actually think that the way they've written this series, so far, is very believable, because I do think that when you have these two very strong, warrior type characters, almost superhero type characters, when you have these two type of characters who goes into every battle fearless and they always walk away. I think what this show has done a really good job with is showing them being extremely vulnerable. Because one way to always get your favorite characters, if you want to make your characters feel vulnerable and actually feel like they're legitimately at risk or legitimately in trouble, what you do is you have to strip away that toughness and sort of make them appear in their most vulnerable state at their lowest times, which is what this episode does at a really good job. It takes these two warriors, but then strips away that physical strength and also that that sort of independent leadership that they both carry. They both have that characteristics of being great leaders. And they strip all that away, and they make it all about the heart and all about the mind and all about feelings and all about their relationship, as opposed to their leadership or their skill or with a weapon or their ability to survive. Because even though they're warriors and they're survivors, at this moment in this time, they are both extremely vulnerable, and they're at their weakest, probably the weakest that we've ever seen Rick and Michonne, simply because of the fact that they are no longer relying on that relationship, but they are trying to get it back. And so I think that vulnerability is what made this episode so unique, and cause it to have such a great rating. From what I can tell, pretty well everybody that's seen this episode has been loving it. I personally think it's one of the best episodes that we've ever seen. But once again, because it strips away that survivalist, sort of that survivalist medium that we've been in. It takes away this, almost superhero action type, genre that these two characters sort of fall into, and strips all that away and makes them focus only on the bare humanity of their love, and just relies solely on their relationship. And it was so cool. And so once Michonne finally has enough, she leaves. And even this scene, I thought, brought a whole bunch of emotion. It was you could really feel the gravity of Michonne, and her desperation to wanting Rick back. She goes out into the hallway, but she doesn't actually continue on. She goes far enough away where he probably wouldn't be able to hear her. He wouldn't notice that she stopped. But then she literally stops and turns around. And in the meantime, you have Rick here inside, who's also very hesitant. He wants to chase after her, but he doesn't. I think a part of him. I think he does want to chase her, but a part of him is probably afraid, because I think he's afraid of what he himself has become, and I think that he's to some degree maybe even ashamed of what he has become, especially after Michonne has been talking to him sort of the way that she's been talking to him. I think he now feels a lot of shame, because she's basically saying, hey, you're a coward. The Rick I know, the Rick I love, wouldn't treat me this way, wouldn't talk to me this way, and would never get on this way. And so I think that I think that he already, to some degree, knows that he wants to be with her, but I think now he's sort of living with that shame of the decisions that he's made, especially when she calls him out on it. And so, but of course he does end up leaving, and as soon as he leaves, we end up getting a helicopter, another CRM helicopter coming. And this helicopter actually ends up coming out and basically shooting a missile at the helicopter that Rick and Michonne was in, and ends up blowing it up. And Rick does explain afterwards why the CRM does this. Apparently the CRM basically goes in and destroys all the evidence of them existing, or at the very least of them ever being there. And that's why the CRM helicopter came and blew this helicopter up, was basically to destroy the evidence that they were ever there. And if there were any survivors, in the plane or in the helicopter or even around the helicopter here at this time, the CRM was more than willing to just open fire and kill the survivors and destroy all of the evidence. But of course, when this happens, this causes the building to start to finally collapse and whatnot. So Rick ends up getting there just in time, and he saves Michonne. And now, once again, they are forced to sort of seek shelter again because now the building is becoming unstable and it is slowly but surely starting to crumble, which is something else that I thought that this episode did a really great job with, as, once again, giving, sort of tipping my hat to Guerrera and her skill with writing this episode. She's a great writer. If this episode has anything, to say for itself or to say about her writing, is that she's a very strong writer, and she really understands these characters as well, not just her own character Michonne, but she really understood Rick's character as well, and so that's sort of what I really loved about this episode, is that they go to a setting. The first part of the episode was all in that one little room where that it was kind of like an apartment building. And it's almost like as their relationship progresses, so do they in the physical world outside of the love or the emotional side. They have to move and go to a new setting. And every time they go to a new setting, the building starts to collapse a little bit all around them. And they're constantly forced to keep moving. But I think that that's also very symbolic to their relationship. And I really liked how they have these little bursts of action sort of sprinkled out throughout the whole episode, but it's also very symbolic to their relationship. And so they end up coming here, and this is basically when Michonne has finally just, she's really had it up to, pretty well maxed out now at this point. She's finally, I think, able to let Rick, sort of let him go. And I won't go as far as saying give up on him, but sort of, she's starting to realize now that maybe she made a mistake coming here. Rick even says in that conversation, he says, I was brought here, but you came here, so to speak, meaning, that he never had a choice to be there because Jadis brought him there, whereas Michonne did have a choice and she chose to be there. And he's like, you should not have come, you put yourself at risk, and maybe even put Alexandria at risk if they had found out, because Jadis does know about Alexandria and all that stuff. So they sort of come to like I would say sort of like a mutual agreement where they just sort of like agree to disagree. And so Rick is like, come on, Michonne, we need to get out of here. So one thing I did like about this sequence was that they actually utilized the environment, which is something that I feel like we have not seen in recent times or in any recent series or even seasons of The Walking Dead. Was that we just got so used to them just carrying their weapons and having bullets and all this stuff, whereas in this episode they're stripped down. They don't even have weapons, so they have to utilize the environment that they're actually in. So they use like the bench off of the seat off of a workout bench. Michonne, steals a piece of rebar, which sort of acts as a substitute for her sword. And so I really like that even their weaponry, even their items and their material, even that was stripped away. So not just the survival instincts, not just them being these superhero type figures, but even everything is stripped away in this episode. Not just their emotion, not just their relationship, but even their physical defense, even their weapons. And so they are forced to work together to sort of get through this. And I just thought that was really clever. As they're trying to escape once again, Michonne ends up getting trapped, and I think this was probably the first time that we really see Rick start to open up a little bit more and really sort of change, turn over a new leaf, so to speak. He's finally starting to come back to himself, and I think it's because he sees that Michonne is actually in danger. He actually sees that Michonne is in danger now, so I think that this sort of a pretty big push forward for Rick, and sort of his path to redemption, because despite what he believes or what he doesn't believe, despite what he's been through, despite the amount of brainwashing he's been put through with the CRM, at the end of the day he still cares and loves for Michonne, and he doesn't want her to get hurt. And so and then basically the episode ends up going back full circle, and they end up escaping that that little situation, and they get away, and they end up back in the same room. Well, not the same room, but a room that's very similar to the room where they began, but this time they're on a different wing. The building is still a little bit safe here right now. On this side of on this side of the building, it's a little safer. So they're in a different room, but it's an identical, which also once again represents sort of their relationship. It's a parallel. Once again, the relationship has come full circle. Once again, Rick starts going on with some serious stuff a little bit, but ultimately, this is when she finally sort of starts to realize that Rick, she probably needs to approach things a little bit differently with Rick, and so Rick starts to kiss her and whatnot, and rather than fight him this time, she sort of surrenders to him, because I think now she realized that the only way that she can get Rick to surrender to her and sort of, rediscover this lost love, not lost love, but this sort of oppressed or suppressed love, is by surrendering to him, and hopefully by her surrendering to him, he will surrender to her, and so they end up making love and whatnot. And then the next day, or I would assume it's the next day, or at least later on in that day, we have a really cool scene here where Rick is talking about RJ, because he finally learns about RJ in this episode, and it was really a beautiful scene, and that was also a big motivation for Michonne. She kept referring to the children a lot and family, which is a big theme for this episode, and so finally, they do sort of, reconnect, and they do make love and whatnot. And then, as they're getting ready to go, Rick finally opens up and actually asks Michonne about the scar on her back, and she tells him. She tells him the truth. She tells him that her and Daryl both have this scar because they end up having to basically fight against someone that she actually knew, that she ended up letting into Alexandria, and they end up, hurting or putting the children at risk, like Judith and whatnot. And so she explains to Rick that her and Daryl basically had to sort of join up, and they end up having to kill this person because of what she was doing to the children. And Rick was actually like good, so it was a pretty cool little scene. He agrees with her, but this is also the first time then that Michonne actually starts to notice that Rick has scars too, because Rick no longer has a hand. If you can remember in the first episode, he cut off his hand to try to escape, and this is when she starts to take a different approach. Rather than being really aggressive and sort of being in his face and being like, "Hey, why are you like this?" blah blah blah. She now starts to finally sympathize and continues to surrender to him, and rather than sort of being aggressive, she becomes much more nurturing, almost like a mother, so to speak, because she is a mother, so she does have those very good nurturing skills, and she becomes a really good listener, and she just sort of starts to acknowledge stuff that he's been through, because she realizes that he has been through a lot of trauma as well, just the same as she has been. And so she sort of asks him about his hand, and then finally, after 4 episodes, or almost 4 full episodes, and a whole bunch of screaming and shouting and dialogue and action sequences, she's finally able to break through to Rick, and he finally breaks down all these walls that he had, that were sort of, stopping him from being able to truly, sort of open up to Michonne. And then he tells her the truth. And she says, "Hey, what did they take from you?" And he says, "Carl." And then we get this, once again, an absolutely beautiful callback to the original series, and we actually get some flashback scenes of him and Carol working together, and he explains to her how, since he's been with the CRM, how he used to survive mentally was he would talk to Carl in his dreams, but then those dreams went away, and then he said that he started to dream about her, Michonne, which is actually a sequence that we did see in the first episode, which now, once again, sort of going to that full circle parallel, so to speak. They're in the same room, a parallel room, going full circle now. Great tie-in too to the original series. Great callback, great tie-in, and he just basically tells her that the CRM, that it got to the point where he could no longer see her or Carol in his dreams, and he explained to her how every time he did see her, it was like they were falling in love over and over and over, and he no longer dreams about her or Carol, and that was I think why he was so beaten and battered and down and so depressed. It was simply because I think personally that this was all sort of symbolic or metaphoric, so to speak, to him losing his humanity, or at the very least losing those memories of what he used to have. He's been away from his family for such a long time that he no longer feels like they're actually a part of him. He's been through so much trauma. He's been away. He's been held captive against his own will at the CRM and brainwashed and told and trained over and over and over, to the point where I think that by him saying that he no longer has these dreams, what he's saying is that he no longer feels like he has a heart. He no longer feels like he has his humanity. He has officially been defeated, but mentally, on a mental level, which is also kind of a callback to when they used to be in the prison. If you can remember when Rick was in the prison, he used to be talking to his wife Lori on the phone. If you can remember that was all a hallucination. So he's been through so much trauma that mentally it's only a matter of time before he would break. But after losing his wife, after losing his son, and then being held captive for 10 years and no longer being able to see anything, see his family or see Alexandria or return to Alexandria, I think this was the final blow, and Rick could no longer handle it. And finally, the CRM was able to break him mentally, which caused him to which is the reason why he acted the way he did for the first 3 episodes, and even for a majority of this episode. But on the brighter note, Michonne is able to finally convince him to come back, so to speak, and then we get sort of like this evolution now into their relationship, which is also kind of new because they're kind of starting over again now. They sort of have to rediscover who they are and whatnot, and we get this really cool action sequence of Michonne and Rick just destroying all these walkers and zombies and whatnot as they exit this building that's crumbling down all around them. Once again, very symbolic to their relationship to the world itself, and it's just such a cool sequence. And they end up leaving the building, and they end up finding this hybrid, electric hybrid. I believe it was a Nissan vehicle, and they both get in there and they drive away. And of course, Michonne just has the biggest smile on her face while they're driving away, because she knows that she finally has Rick back now, and she probably doesn't have anything to worry about now, or at least she feels like she doesn't have anything to worry about now because they are back together. And honestly, that was a perfect ending to this episode, and quite frankly, I thought this could have been even a perfect ending to this to the series as a whole, or at least to season 1, I should say. But of course, we know there's going to be 2 more episodes, and we know for a fact that there will be consequences to Rick and Michonne escaping. They did show in a promo, one of the promo trailers or TV spots or whatever it was, they did show Jadis they're in a car chase with Jadis, so eventually Jadis will find this truck and will chase after them. I have no doubts in my mind that Jadis will potentially end up dying, but I do think that if Jadis is killed, it'll be done by Michonne. I don't see Rick killing Jadis, not because he wouldn't. I think he would take her life if he absolutely had to, if it came down between her or Michonne, but I just don't see him out of the blue just killing her. I think he's intimidated by her a little bit, but I also think that he has a lot of respect for Jadis, just for the fact that I think they've always sort of had that leadership respect. Even in the original series, even though they were oftentimes on opposite sides, they did have a fair amount of respect for each other. There was no reason for Jadis to actually recruit Rick. She really didn't need to save him. I do think that she did it for the sake of trying to get herself back into the CRM, to try to make the CRM trust her again, so to speak. So I do think that she saved Rick to some degree for her own personal gain, but it still wasn't absolutely necessary. I mean, let's be honest, she could have really, there's a lot of people that were a part of Alexandria, and a lot of people a part of a whole bunch of different communities that I think she could have absolutely gotten that she had access to. But the fact that she saved Rick specifically, I think is I think to some degree it was because they do sort of have a mutual respect. And I think that she did look at Rick as being sort of honorable and trustworthy, because even during the battle with Negan and the Saviors, it was never, Jadis was the one that betrayed Rick. It was never Rick betraying her. So I think that she's seen that sort of as a form of loyalty as well. So that's another reason why I think she trusts Rick in a very, more of in a respect way, as opposed to she actually trusts him. I mean, I think she does be concerned a little bit that maybe there could be complications with him, but at the same time, like I said, I do think that I think that she do look at Rick as being loyal. So all in all, I absolutely love this episode. I thought the writing was absolutely spot on. I thought Guerrera did a phenomenal job with this episode, and also I want to give credit to the direction as well. The director of this episode did a great job as well, because of the fact that just by the way that it was put together. Even the editing was done really well too, but I think that the directing and the writing were the two things that stand out the most with this episode, because don't get me wrong, Guerrera did a phenomenal job with her part, but I don't think that but I think the writing and the directing sort of played off of each other. I don't think the directing would have been as good if it wasn't for the writing, and then same the other way around. I don't think the story would have been as good if it wasn't for the direction. So I think the directing and writing of this episode was spot on. I loved the amount of symbolism and metaphors that was sort of in this entire episode. They needed a timeout. They needed to get away. They needed a break because their relationship was so rocky, and Michonne needed to get Rick back on the same page to sort of save him and bring him back to her on a mental and emotional level, not just a physical level. And that is exactly sort of the environment that we had. They ended up getting sort of coming to this place that was attacked by the CRM, kind of like how Rick was, Michonne was attacked by the CRM, and then Rick was held captive by the CRM, so he was also trapped mentally from the CRM as well, and so they're inside of this building, and the building is crumbling down all around them, which was, kind of Michonne's perspective. She feels like her world and her relationship with Rick is crumbling down all around them, so she's, doing whatever she can to try to save them. All these little, subtle sort of symbolism and symbolisms in the episode, the environment, and not only that, but once they do escape, that building in the background actually does fully collapse, so they'll never, there's no reason for them to ever go back there again, which is also symbolic to their relationship. There's no need for Rick to ever go back to the CRM, and that whole chapter, that whole imprisonment has sort of collapsed. So, but I also think that could be sort of like a foreshadow of things to come, because I do think that there's going to be serious consequences for Rick and Michonne escape, especially Rick more so even than Michonne. But I do think that the CRM are going to eventually want to hunt these people, maybe even attack. I'm still pretty convinced that they are going to attack Alexandria and Hilltop, like we said in Dead City. Maggie is at the Hilltop. Some people think that it's because of the Whisperer War, and that it was just that the Whisperers did too much damage, and I could see that. I can totally get behind that theory. I do agree that the Whisperers really did in Hilltop. They basically burned everything to the ground and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I don't think that there would ever be so much damage that it couldn't be undone. I mean, they could still rebuild. I think it was something more to it, and it could very well be that the CRM will eventually end up attacking Alexandria and Hilltop, which would eventually be the reason why Maggie ends up going to the Brinks, or Bricks, whatever it was they called it. I thought it was Bricks, but it could have been Brinks, whichever, tomato, so to speak. But either way, I absolutely love this episode. Cannot wait to see the final two episodes. Now that we have Rick back and he is with Michonne, I'm very curious to see how the CRM is going to play into it from here on out. The CRM is basically the only only civilization that has been sort of put into all the series. They've been in The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead. World Beyond was completely about the CRM, and now, of course, The Ones Who Live. I would be curious to know if the area that Daryl is in over in France, is that a faction of the CRM, or are they somehow in cooperation with the CRM? And then I'm very curious to see Dead City. I feel like the purpose of Dead City is that Negan and Maggie will eventually, or potentially, eventually take over, that whole sort of civilization that's in New York City. So, you could say that we could be seeing a massive war beginning to brew here, which will eventually involve, all the characters from Dead City and sort of all these communities that are in New York combined with the Commonwealth. I could see Princess and the other characters from Commonwealth coming back. I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot more with Alexandria or Hilltop or like Kingdom and those places and whatnot. I think that or at least I hope we don't really go back there. It would be nice for us to be able to move on past that now. And I think the CRM, Rick and Michonne escaping is a great way to sort of get rid of those communities, because you can have the CRM sort of just go in and wipe all that out for the sake of retaliating against Rick. And we also know that Michonne does not know about the Commonwealth. She has been gone before any of the characters found the Commonwealth, so even she might think that the CRM has actually killed Judith and RJ because both Rick and Michonne, neither one of them knows about Commonwealth, so it would be a great motivation for them to sort of go into overkill mode and just want to, go all out war with the CRM, and it could become even like this huge, massive global, almost like a World War III type scenario, but I think that if all these big communities combined and did, end up growing an alliance, Commonwealth, everything from Dead City, maybe Daryl somehow could get those factions from France involved, and then of course whatever other spin-off series we end up getting. We also have the community that Nat was from, who helped Michonne, that mobile community. You could get those people involved. You could get some characters from Fear the Walking Dead, involved. Plus we have Morgan, who's still sort of in limbo. So be very curious to see, how all the alliances sort of end up forming to come together to eventually have to stop the CRM. But I do think the CRM is going to ultimately be the main big bad for the entire Walking Dead universe, and I'd be very curious to see where the story goes from here. But anyways, folks, that's my review and breakdown of episode 4 of The Ones Who Live. Let me know in the comment section below if you've seen this episode, and if you'd like to tell me why or why not. If you like this video, click that subscribe button, and until the next one, take care.